Start recording. Okay, we're gonna. Okay, got another minute to set up. I can edit this down. Okay, let's see. Is this going through? We're gonna see if this is gonna work. Is this working? We're gonna see. I'm testing it. Yep, it's working. Great. Okay, everybody. Sorry, it took a minute. Was trying to deal with dumb technology. So I know it's been a couple days, well, couple weeks really, since I've done anything, and it's mainly because my friend Eric, who has been producing it for the show for the most part, just hasn't been available, which is not really his fault. He's just been busy with school now, and now he just started school back up, and he's been working a lot, and we just haven't found the time. And then me trying to find a job and getting set up for a job. So I just got a answer back yesterday, and I did get a new job. I will be starting Monday now, so which is pretty exciting. At Crystal Metal Works, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Because I need to talk about some things that have been bugging me for a little while now. So I have been. Oh, and by the way, I'm sorry that there's no camera here. I found an old camcorder uh, that I need something to go between the camcorder and the computer for the video to work, and I don't want to use the webcam because it's not a very good webcam. Uh, so yes, you're just gonna have to deal with audio today, but I put a picture up, so should be at least semi happy for that. But I have been on a bit of a uh, irritation lately because I have friends that are conservative, and there's liberals that are like this too, that that know what they believe, but don't really understand why they believe it, and that is it's almost a bad thing in a way, because I do appreciate their support, especially if they're conservative. If they're liberal, it's like because I feel like if I could tell them more things, they would be willing to actually have their mind changed. But a lot of people just don't want to hear otherwise from what they believe. So what I'd like to see is just more people just open to discuss things. But with people that are conservative, there's a lot of people like I know Christians are like, well, I know that you should be pro-life, but I don't know why. Or they'll be be people that like I know it's bad to have socialized healthcare, but I don't know why that's bad. So I've just been a little irritated with this, and I think that it's almost bad for the cause in a way. It's good because we have numbers in the polls and all, and that when we vote, it's good. But I don't like that people just don't understand because you can end up getting turned away easily when you're hear new information because conservatives are more inherently open to hear new ideas anymore because they have a more libertarian mindset and they believe in free speech, but liberals do not typically. Well, when I say liberals, I'm not speaking accurately progressives because liberal ideas are just a separate thing. Because when we say liberal over here in the States, we think left, but liberal ideas are actually more aligned with libertarian ideas because it means to liberalize, to get more liberty, more freedom. So that's a little bit different. So I do mean progressive ideas when you're on the left because they're just different things. And I like to make that distinction because there's lots of people that are actually what you would call classical liberals, but they would actually align much more on the right, or at least a little bit right of center, but relatively high on the libertarian area and less authoritarian because they find a lot more common ground with the mainstream Republican Party than they would ever find on the so-called liberal party, but the really progressive party of the Democrat Party, because the Democrat Party has just gone so authoritarian and so far progressive that it's just bad. Sorry, little tangent right there. But I've been thinking about this for a while, and there's lots of people that I know that like to get into arguments, and I would definitely be one of those people. And they like to get into an argument to fight for the cause, but they don't know how to fight for it. Like Eric and my friend Colin, they would not that they don't know how to, because they actually do know why they believe things for the most part, but they may not know how to articulate as well. But they will have me. They'll like sick them because they'll get into a argument online or in comments or on Instagram or text or Snapchat, and they will be asking me questions like, "How do I fight this point? How do I fight this point?" And I think it's at least good that you know that you don't know everything for the scope of knowledge, but I would like to see more people understand that. And I've actually written little like Google Docs things to help fight for them to use to reference to fight with people when they are online. And they apparently recently they haven't been doing it just because they've just gotten so irritated with the new president, who I haven't been keeping up with the inauguration today whatsoever. Sorry, I'm typing. Which is kind of sad because they get triggered. Not really. They're just really irritated that it seems like the election was stolen, and no matter what you believe, whether it was stolen or not, it's sad. So, but they haven't, which is kind of sad for me because I do like the arguments, and I. But the main thing that people like to talk about with progressivism versus conservatism is because I believe that the root of it is secularism versus Judeo-Christian values, more specifically Christian values, because Judeo-Christian is a little more vague than Christian values, because Christian values are almost all the time you're going to be pretty right. There's very few what I would call real Christians that really believe in Christianity that are going to end up being left. Because one is the pro-life thing. That's the biggest thing. And in all honesty, if I had to pick one issue that I'm going to have to vote on, and I would say it's probably the most important thing, I'd probably say pro-life. I've said that for a little while now to my friends, but just because I think it's killing babies, and I just can't stand for that. And so, but the biggest thing is values, where you come from. So and I think one of the big problems is when you have conservatives typically are what you would call lower in openness and higher in conscientiousness, more specifically orderliness. Jordan Peterson talks about this all the time. And because of this, openness is the creativity dimension, as they would say. So more creative people typically are going to be liberal and more closed mind, what you would call closed mind people, would be considered conservatives. And even though a lot of the left is pretty closed minded, but that's a separate type of thing. So you have all these things where uh, people tend to what you would call vote their temperament. So you can be temperamentally uh, conservative, and that would be more of the conscientiousness. Because the two biggest predictors in life success would be conscientiousness and openness. So openness being creativity, and then uh, conscientiousness being broken down into orderliness, and then industriousness, and more so orderliness. And that is a big deal because, like you can see, people like Steven Crowder, they are very open because they're very creative. They're comedians. He's a comedian, rather. So he obviously has to be creative and open in that sense. But because he's been struck by Christian values and raised as a Christian, he's conservative, and he sees. So it's a little bit different. And then you can get into the economics part of it, where he's done well for himself, and he feels that he's entitled to keep most of his money. So there's a few different factors there why you're going to vote in a certain way. But I feel like there's just so many people that just don't know why they believe what they believe. And I'm like, that's why would you believe anything if you don't know why you believe it? At least say I don't know. But there's a lot of people who are just really strong on what they believe, but they have no way to substantiate an argument. And then a lot of people, which really, really bugs me, is people that don't like to talk through issues whatsoever. And this makes me so mad because like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't know enough about it. Then why would you have an opinion on it? It's so dumb. And it makes me so mad because, one, the only way ideas can get it really good and they can get narrowed down to where they really should be is to put them through what I would term the refiner's fire. Because an idea is like a raw chunk of metal and it hasn't been tested. And sometimes you can test it to the point that it doesn't work. And but when it goes through that really hot cycle and then beaten, it becomes stronger and it gets down to where that metal or that idea is raw and it can really be worked and it can't be broken in a sense. And I think ideas need to go through that, and no one likes to talk through that. And everyone that knows me, at least vaguely well, will know I like an argument. It's a fact. I don't argue with everyone. I try to be nice, but if it's something that I'm passionate about, I love an argument. And it's a problem. I will admit that it's a character flaw, but I just like it. And it's like that, what you would call intellectual combat, where you're parsing through ideas and like, I had one of the dumbest things I feel like, and now you can disagree with this or whatever. But it's like, how can you call yourself pro-life but you're pro-death penalty? And it's like, you haven't gone through a fifth grade debate. Like, you just don't even understand how to structure a debate. It's like you're just trying to get a one-liner that doesn't even make sense, but it sounds good on a YouTube thread or a Twitter thread. And it makes me so irritated. Because Jordan Peterson had a great line, and I'm gonna misquote it, I know, but it was like when Kathy Griffin, something like that. When he was on Channel 4, when the big thing was like, so what you're saying is, if you remember that, you can drop it in the comments. I'm forgetting her name right now, but she said, "What gives you the right to say something? What rights do you have that overlaps the idea that you should have the right to say something opposed from a trans person not have the right to be how does that supersede a trans right not to be offended?" And as he said, and it was a great line, he said, in order to go through the world, you must risk being offensive. And everyone's so worried about offending people, and I get so mad about that. Now there's trolling or crap posting where you are just doing something just to get a reaction out of someone, and that's a little bit different, even though I find that quite hilarious. Sorry, got a tickle in my throat. But in all honesty, I think that has a time and place, but that's different than saying something because you're trying to get to the root cause of an issue or just parse through an idea. Because, like, Joe Rogan talks about sometimes you can have a base idea for a bit or a joke, and it's raw and it's obviously it can work in a way, but it hasn't been tested enough that it really is going to just kill people on while he's on stage. And I think that's a good way to think about ideas because you can craft arguments in different ways in order to make them work better. And I just would like to see more discussion overall with these kind of things because it's sad when people don't want to talk about things. And I mean, everyone knows I love to talk, hence me doing this podcast. But you need to let language not be a taboo. And it makes me so irritated anymore that people just don't want to talk anymore. And like I guess it was like a week ago, but I went on a video. I think it was a Stephen Colbert video, who claims to be a Catholic, but it was like he was so pro-abortion, and there was people in the comments saying, "I would rather have 9-month abortions than no abortions at all," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're not even concerned with viability. You're just killing a baby." Because 5 months, we have a pretty darn good chance that we're going to be able to save that baby. And it's just getting, and the line for viability is just going lower and lower and lower. And I think that's amazing because more kids are going to be saved by that, but that's a separate thing. And this guy who claims to be a Catholic, Catholics are pretty pro-life most of the time because the Bible says, "I knew you before you were in your mother's womb," as in you were a soul before you even conceived. And I think that's a big thing. And then if you don't want to go to a Christian perspective, you can go to a straight secular scientific perspective because you have people because you have that zygote. When that egg is fertilized by the sperm, you have a completely new set of DNA, and that DNA will determine everything from a person's temperament to an eye color. Now, temperament and mind problems is partly sociological, but there's a good part that's biological. And eye color, height, weight, body type, anything that you can conceive about how a person's going to look, there's a good chance that it's encoded in that genetics that is separate from the father and the mother. So you don't have the right to kill people. So I went through and I was just like, people in the comments just being so stupid. And it was clear that none of these people had ever had a good discussion in their life. And I can blame that partially on conservatives because a lot of conservatives don't like to talk about what they believe in because they're scared for societal repercussions. And, that's a fair opinion to have. I don't agree, though, because I think it's better to leave yourself open, bare to attack, and being able to withstand it and work through something. I mean, Jordan Peterson also talks about walk straight up with your shoulders back, and that's a vulnerable position, and I think you should have that with your idea of ideas and your opinions. Okay, now that rant is over, I want to talk about Porsche because there is a Porsche that I do like, and it's the only Porsche that I like, well, that they still make, is the Taycan, but that's a separate thing because I think it's good because I like that there's new competition for Tesla, because Tesla, it's like, yeah, they're fast, and I think that what they're doing is kind of cool, not my thing. But I like that Porsche stepping in and trying to make it more of a sports car than just a straight line car. Because Teslas, because they're heavy and all, they don't handle that good. And that's fine. If you're not into that, that's totally reasonable. But I like going around corners. I always have, because straight line speed is fun. I'm not gonna lie, and I think part of the reason why is because my car, because it's all-wheel drive, and for the kind of car it is, it has relatively wide tires. And then it's a boxer engine, so the center of gravity is relatively low for that kind of car. I have a Subaru Legacy, and it's just a 2.5. It's slow as crap, but I can get it to go around a corner reasonably well, and I find that fun. I've never had a fast car. I've driven fast car. I've driven my dad's Corvette, and I mean that's very fun. But I've never gone around backwards. I've only driven that in parking lots because my dad's trying to make sure that I know how to drive that before he's ever going to let me drive that on the road. But that's a separate issue. But But I like that they're trying to make this Taycan a real sports car, and I think that's great because why can't an electric car be a proper sports car? And I know it's expensive, but one funny thing is because Porsche has the stupidest naming system. Like I get having an S or a GTS, but then when you have on a electric car a turbo, it's called turbo. Why? Electric cars cannot use a turbo. Like for the longest time on Porsche's naming system, the turbo actually meant the car was turboed. All their cars are turboed basically anymore. Almost all of them, except for the Taycan, obviously. It'd be kind of funny if it did have a turbo because it'd just be useless. Uh, but the naming systems are so dumb. And I don't know how you figure out which one is best because there's about 10 million models for each Porsche. It just is so much work just to figure out because you have the Cabriolet or you have the convertible or you have the Carrera versus the regular 911, and it's like, oh my gosh. And it's like, I don't know who in Porsche thinks that this naming system is any good. Actually, I don't. The 911's dumb. We'll just put it that way. It's dumb. It was dumb from the beginning. It's the Hitler car. It was conceived. So, rear engine in the Beetle actually makes sense because what it does is it allows for more passenger room for a shorter amount of car because that rear axle where it's directly connected to the drivetrain makes sense because it allows for a lot of room in the rear seat for such a small car, and then you can have a relatively short hood, except for if you want more trunk space, which is a little bit different, or Franck. You got to get something from the Franck. That is pretty cool. If you have a rear engine or a mid-engine car, that you have a Franck. You get to say Franck everywhere. But the 911, I know it's not a Beetle. I'm calling it a Beetle, though, because the guy, one of the people that was mainly responsible for making the Beetle, was Ferdinand Porsche, and who was another main contributor for the Beetle? Adolf Hitler. So that's always good when you hear his name brought up for making something. It's like the Autobahn was made by the Nazi Party. It's like, well, at least they did something good. Well, no, it was obviously for they were trying to move military tanks and trucks and things like Jeeps across the country, so they made the roads. It was obvious what he was trying to do. Don't compliment that man. He didn't do anything good. But the 911. So, I mean, the 911. When was the first 911? I can't even remember. I had that number earlier, and I'm forgetting it. Okay, 1963, which means it's almost 60 years old since the first 911 came out. And the funny story about the 911 is that it wasn't originally called 911. It was going to be called I think it was either a 901 or a 910. But France was being stupid, and Porsche, because it was a German company and the Germans just lost the war and they were trying to make peace in the world, they didn't fight it because basically the French said, we have a patent or copyright, I think it was, on all car names that are three numbers long that have the zero in the middle. And Porsche was like, oh my gosh, whatever, fine, we'll call it 911. Fine, that's good. And which is kind of funny. I believe that somewhere in the Netherlands, that for a long time they were using Porsches as police cars, which would be kind of funny in this country because if they use Porsches on police cars, they wouldn't even have to change the number on the back for people to call them. So yeah, that's kind of funny, I think. But the 911's been around for almost 60 years, and the big thing with the 911 is that it has that rear engine, rear wheel drive, which I found out is great for rallying because the whole thing with rear engine and rear drive is that it has what's called snap oversteer. So oversteer, for people that don't know, is if, say you have the front wheels turned left, and then you have the back end is going to come out from behind you. And that back end, when it swirls behind you, it's like a drift. It will come out, and it can be dangerous because it will all of a sudden be going straight, 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 lose traction, and then the tail will snap out. And that's why it's called snap oversteer. But then an additional part of that that's bad is that it will all of a sudden gain traction and then snap back into going straight. So it's a little bit touchy. Now the grip is pretty insane because that rear engine and over the rear wheels, because rear engine is anything that's over the rear wheels or behind them. So it causes an incredible amount of grip. So it can be good sports cars, but it's dangerous. So you have all of a sudden grip, 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 no grip, and no grip, grip, no grip, no grip, and then all of a sudden a lot of grip. So it's just not a good design. You have to be a really good driver in order to get the best out of it. That's why mid-engine design is definitely the best design. For kart racing, my dad talked to me about this when he was kart racing in the 80s. And when I say kart racing, I mean like go-kart racing, like 18 horsepower engines, small stuff on small tracks. We used to have it for a while, and I used to ride around in it for a while. And it was really fun to drive. And that was where I learned a lot of just basic techniques like for oversteer and all that. But the main way to set up your car was when you're sitting in it, you want about 40% of the weight over the rear wheels, and you want about 60% over the rear wheels. Oh, 40% over the front wheels, 60% in the rear wheels. I don't think I got that right at first. But but this design is done for mid-engine cars, for like example the new Corvette, because it's especially good under braking, because when you have the brakes, the car will shift forward because of the suspension. So when it does that, it's shifting a bunch of the weight to the front wheels because you want it to be about 50-50. Because for most cars that are front engine, most of the weight is going to be in the front, and then when you brake, it's going to, because you have the momentum, it's shifting the weight forward a little bit. So most of the braking is done by the front wheels. So what they did with the new Corvette, because most of the braking is done by the front wheels with a front engine car, when you shift that weight back, more of the braking is done by the rear wheels. So one of the things that was interesting about the new Corvette was it has bigger brakes on the rear than the front, which is indicative that most of the braking is probably going to be done by the rear wheels, which is cool because it stabilizes it, and then by making it more grip and shifting where the braking does, it can make it brake faster. And then also by having more of the braking done in different areas, that means you can have bigger rotors that are actually effective, which means the heat will dissipate faster because you have bigger brakes, which is the biggest deal for on track, because you want that, make sure that the brakes don't fade, because when the brakes get too hot, they will fade. Because like you can get different pads and all to help compensate for that. But the biggest thing is bigger rotors and bigger brakes because you have a bigger surface area for the heat to dissipate. That was a big tangent. I'm sorry. So yeah. But back to the Porsche is one thing that is interesting about it is because I think rally racing is pretty cool because they're less limited by fuel than almost any other type of racing. And if you're going to say drift racing is racing, it's not racing because it's not determined by lap time, which is what racing is, but it's determined by style and how good you held the drift and how hard the angle was of the drift. That's not racing, and that which means it's not a sport because it's subjective. Sorry. But rally racing, because they're not limited by fuel, it can drive almost completely flat out, which I think is great. One of the things that I thought was interesting, I believe it was the 959 Porsche, which was a super futuristic design, was made so that way it was really fast on the track, but then it was also really fast in the dirt, because it was made for Group B racing, which was a super far out way of rally racing at the time. And I understand. I think that in a lot of types of racing, I think that there should be an open class where you can have the biggest or the smallest car that you want, with the biggest size engine that you want, with the biggest driver making the most power that you could possibly want. And I think there should be some leagues that are just regulated for smaller people that are trying to come up in the ranks and get more money and more sponsorships. And then I think that there should be an open class where you can spend as much money as you want and all, and you can just make the cars go as fast as humanly possible. Mechanically possible, really, which I think is really cool. But the 959 did that, and I even lost my point. Oh, but snap oversteer is not so much of a thing. It happens much more slowly on the dirt with a Porsche 911 because when you are on loose surface, because there's much more limited traction, the tires don't all of a sudden just bite. They bite more slowly, so it's actually pretty easy to manage it. And So the traction actually works pretty good in the back. So before they made the shift to four wheel drive and all wheel drive, in rally racing, a rear engine designed rear wheel drive was much better. And the whole thing that makes me so irritated, because a lot of people like to say, well, rear wheel drive is much worse in the snow than front wheel drive or all wheel drive. Okay, it is worse in the snow than all wheel drive, but you know what? It is definitely better than front wheel drive if you know what you're doing and you know how to handle the vehicle. Because you know who was racing on loose surface and snow forever with rear wheel drive? All of Rally. And actually, at some points, like Lancia, the last people to win with rear wheel drive in rally racing, they won against the Audi Quattro, which had all wheel drive, or I guess it was technically four wheel drive. There is a difference. But they used rear wheel drive. They didn't use front wheel drive. Front wheel drive is not as good. Front wheel drive is great for making everything compact, and it's good for production because you don't have two areas, and then can make things cheaper. And then you can also get a direct where the engine is right over the front axle, and then you have the transmission right built in between it. So that way you don't have a drive shaft, which makes it lighter and it makes it more efficient. So for economy cars, I definitely get it. Front wheel drive is easier, and a lot of people will like it. Fine, but it is false that that rear wheel drive is worse than front wheel drive in the snow. It's just false. It can be better. Sorry, I get very frustrated with these kind of things. Uh, there's another car thing I thought I was going to talk. Oh, that's right. I want to talk about electric cars for a little bit, and I don't, and not just the Taycan. It's just the ideas of electric cars in general, and climate change and all that crap. Uh, because I don't have a problem with electric cars per se, but when people want to signal, because they're white guilt, with a Tesla or whatever, or a Nissan Leaf or a Chevy Bolt, yeah, the Bolt. I always mix up the names for the Chevy Bolt and the Chevy Volt because I know one's the hybrid, one's not. Uh, but I don't like them for a couple reasons. Because a lot of people like to talk about, well, they emit less emissions than gasoline powered cars, and it's like yes and no. So I have some stats right here that I jotted down earlier. When the average electric vehicle, now these stats are a few years old, so I understand these could be a little off now. Um, but I believe these stats are right around from 2016. But when a new electric car is made from scratch, because you have to, especially lithium-ion batteries, which are really bad for the emissions wise. I'm not going to say for the environment because we'll see. Because according to AOC, we're going to all die in like 4 years. But that's a separate story. Uh, but they are responsible just from making the car, not driving the car, just from the build process of making an electric car. It will cause about 25,000 pounds of CO2 emissions. Uh, now, to be perfectly honest, I don't know what that means, but for the average internal combustion car, when new, it was responsible for about 16,000 pounds of CO2 emissions being made. 9,000 pounds of CO2 emissions less to make an internal combustion car, whether that be diesel or gas, because it's an average. Um, now, so that's a lot less, and all the weirdos, I'm gonna say weirdos, progressives that are crazy about climate change, like to talk about how CO2 is so bad for the environment. Well, if they really believe that, they would maybe stop breathing. That's a joke. That's not serious. Someone's going to take that out of context. It's obviously a joke because you breathe out CO2 every single day. Plant more trees and plant more plants because they breathe in CO2. But over the course of a Nissan Leaf, which at the time, of these stats, it was the most popular electric car there was. Now, I know that Tesla's probably more popular now just because Tesla's become more in the mainstream. They have the Model 3, which is significantly cheaper. I get all that. But over the course of a 90,000 mile lifetime of the car, we're going to use 90,000 miles because there's lots of cars that are crap, Chryslers, that just don't last that long. So we're going to say 90,000 mile lifetime. And we're going to include within that process, this is the process of uh, what was it? The production of the car, so making the car, the energy consumption of the car, and then scrapping the car. How much CO2 emissions? And this is in metric tons. It's a little bit different stat, but we're gonna go with this. That this will cause for the Nissan Leaf over the course of 90,000 miles, from the process of getting the energy out of the earth to make the electricity, making the car, and then scrapping the car, it's going to produce about 31 metric tons of CO2 emissions. A comparable car of the same size and would from this time would be a Mercedes A-Class 160, and over that same course of time, same process, that will cause about 34 metric tons of CO2 emissions. So that's not that much lower. So you, by thinking that you're going to save the earth by buying an electric car, you're wrong, because that is not that much less. And and you know, if you want to come up with the argument that, well, people haven't been working on electric cars or trying to make them as good as internal combustion cars as long, and so so the engineering will get better. And you know, that's at least a fair argument, and I'm not going to argue, because the free market fixes a lot of things. Yay, capitalism, great. But if we want to go to the daddy of electric cars, we're going to go to the Tesla Model S. So in that same process, same mileage and all of that 90,000 miles, and that will use up about 44 metric tons of CO2 emissions. So that's even significantly more than the Nissan Leaf. But in all fairness, it is a significantly bigger car with a much longer range, especially from this time. So about the same size car, from what I was seeing, would be an Audi 7 Quattro. Over that same time period, same process, it's going to produce about 49 metric tons of CO2 emissions. So we're talking about a 44 to a 49 for the Tesla and the Audi. It's about 5 metric tons difference, and that's not nothing. I'm not going to say that's not nothing. And for the Nissan Leaf and the Mercedes, we're talking about 3 metric ton difference. So, and I'm not going to say that's not nothing, because that is something. And the free market can make it better. But at the same time, you're also going to be getting internal combustion engines that are making the emissions significantly lower, in the process of making them significantly lower. I think it was Jeremy Clarkson. He said was one of the times on Top Gear, and he was driving a Porsche, sadly. But Porsche, as far as emissions wise, they do an incredible job of really cutting down emissions. Just because they really care about that, because they're Germany and Germany sucks. I know I'm German, so I'm allowed to say it. That's how that works. But they were actually doing it at one point. They said that in certain filthy cities that have really bad pollution, because a lot of people don't know this about Los Angeles if you've never been, but the pollution there was really bad at one point, and apparently it's still not great in comparison to other cities. But because it's in a valley, a big part of it is that the smog or the pollutions like to sit down onto the city. I don't know why I'm doing hand motions when there's no camera. Sorry. But it likes to settle in the city, and then the air quality is not that good. But Jeremy Clarkson said that in some cities, like LA, that the air quality coming out of the tailpipe of that car is actually better than the air quality it's taking in, which means if you want to save the earth, buy I'm gonna go with a Cayman, because I don't like the 911. So buy a Cayman. That's the moral of the story. If you want to save the earth, buy a Cayman. But I think that's pretty incredible, because that means that we can make engines that are low in pollutants if you want to say they're pollutants. Now, I don't believe in climate change very much. I think, is it possible that we're contributing to the climate getting warmer? Possibly. Is climate change, do you think the government can fix climate change? No, I don't think the U.S. government has the ability to fix climate change. That's crap. That is total crap, because we're not even the biggest emitters. Now, I think I saw something today that we might be per capita the biggest pollutants, but that's because we're the richest country on earth and we have more cool things. Capitalism again, great. But this means that through capitalism we can actually fix the pollutant problem, because no one wants to make the environment worse. Everyone knows this. No conservative really believes that we want the environment get worse. Unless you have a burn it down mentality, then go for it. Uh, but we can make cars better, and we've gotten a lot better at that. I mean, even the invention of the catalytic converter is incredible, because the catalytic converter, if you don't understand how a catalytic converter does, a catalytic converter does a second burning of the missed fuel uh, within the exhaust. So your car, it burns, it does the combustion, and it comes out the exhaust manifold, and it goes through, and sometimes there'll be a resonator before the catalytic converter, sometimes there'll be one after, or sometimes both. But it will go through the exhaust system, and it'll go through the catalytic converter. So it catalytically, which is a process of a special kind of burning. So uh, when the metal in the catalytic converter, which is platinum, palladium, and I believe some sort of uh, aluminum oxides, but they heat up and they're little pellets, and they heat up and they essentially reburn the fuel to make sure that less of the fuel uh, is just going out the tailpipe. So it's actually more effectively burning it. So that allows the car to actually have lower emissions and less oxides of nitrogen, and then so that way most of the what's coming out the tailpipe is CO2 and water, which is pretty incredible. And I believe those were started being mass produced in the 80s as far as on cars. But that in of itself was a big contributor to making pollution a lot less in a lot of cities, especially places like LA. But I heard that in New York, or did I hear or read? I think I read it. That in New York, uh, if you have your window down while you're driving, that is so bad for you, because just the amount of brake dust that's going through the air because people just stop start, which is why I will never live in a city. Hopefully, never live in a city. We'll put it that way. Uh, that it's just so bad for your breathing, because all that brake dust can be highly toxic. Like I talked about, I believe in my first podcast when I was talking about the ZL11 Elite Camaro, that it was going to be banned in Oregon and California, and which is one, it's a dumb rule because legal in all the other states are saying we're better than you, white guilt again. But then it's that stuff can be toxic if you have a lot amount of it, because you have thousands of cars in that little island of Manhattan, and all that brake dust is just going into the air, and the cars moving around with the air currents. It's just getting tossed up in the air, and people are breathing it in. And I think it was like, if you're living in a big city like New York, I think you're cutting down your life expectancy by like 5 years, just because of all the toxic crap you're breathing in, from things like brake dust, and then probably homeless people crapping in the streets. Oh wait, no, that's San Francisco. My bad. Yeah, they crap in the streets in San Francisco. Well, no, and I believe that it's actually no fine if you crap in the streets if the person craps in the street, but if your dog craps on the sidewalk, when I say street, I mean sidewalk as well. But if your dog craps on the sidewalk and you don't clean it up, you can get a fine. But there's no fine if you say it's your crap. So and I doubt they're going to send it off to a lab. And I'm saying this mainly in jest. Don't lie to the police officer. Said, no, I pooped in the street. It wasn't my dog. But if it's so ridiculous, like, at least an animal has an excuse. Like, it has to go outside. It's how they're programmed, how God intended it. They go outside. You're a person. You don't have to go outside to poop in. It's just, the homeless problem in places like California has gotten so bad. It's so bad. Sorry. Back to the electric cars, but another thing that bugs me about electric cars is and Steven Crowder talked about this for a while, and I think he kind of backtracked because, and it's and I think his arguments are reasonable. I don't necessarily agree with it, but because his wife needed a car that had some self-driving functions, but he didn't like Tesla for a long time because he didn't like the amount of government subsidies that was given Tesla. Perfectly reasonable. I agree with that 100%. He's kind of backtracked because he says, well, a lot of the other American car companies take subsidies for electric cars, and that's a fair argument. I understand it, but I just wish that they would just cut that out completely because I don't think that these electric car companies should be getting subsidies just because they're quote unquote green energy, even though they're not that green. Uh, but all these subsidies are extremely expensive. Okay, for example, in 2014, the electric cars were subsidized by the government by over $700 million. So that means that every single person, to big companies, mind you, and if you want to, if you're liberal and you think that it's like, why am I paying money for Goldman Sachs, or why doesn't Goldman Sachs pay their fair share? These are multi-million-dollar companies, probably multi-billion-dollar companies actually, that are getting millions of dollars of subsidies. Why do they need that subsidies? Just because they want to make an electric car? No, free market will allow if we really need cars and we really need them to be electric, the free market will fix it because someone will always come along unless it's government subsidized, because then there's no competition because you get government money into it, because the free market hashes through these problems. But when you have government subsidies, the free market doesn't get to work its complete work because someone will always come along to make it faster, cheaper, and better. That's how the free market works. That's how healthcare works. That's why the healthcare in the United States is so good, even though we have an unholy marriage between uh, economic socialist healthcare, where we have to pay so much, and well, I don't pay because, yeah, I don't pay because my parents are very nice to me. We'll put it that way. But American citizens have to pay so much in healthcare costs through insurance because we subsidize so much through Medicare, and things skyrocket because of Medicare. Because it's just this terrible relationship where the free market doesn't really have a good stranglehold because socialists are creeping in and say, we want your money. But the same thing happens with things like cars, where you get government subsidies to things and it just causes a bunch of crap. And I just get really irritated by that. And another thing is, if you buy an electric car, you did not fully buy that car. I don't care how much money you paid towards it or all to yourself. You didn't even get a loan or anything. You did not buy that car completely outright. Because you know what? You got over $7,000 in kickback from the government because you bought an electric car, and you can try to virtue signal over people because you have an electric car. Now, not everyone that has an electric car is like that. There's a lot of people that are like that. But they're coal cars, after all, because a lot of the electricity in this country comes from coal. And that means that electric cars are coal-powered cars, which is kind of funny to me. Even though coal has gotten so good because of what we call clean coal. It's a special kind of coal that's only produced in the United States, or only found in the United States, I believe, or pretty rare outside of the United States. We'll go with that. But that coal, it burns really clean, and it's real slow, and it produces a lot of energy, which I think is pretty great because go coal, because I hate the environment. So, moving on to plastic straws and paper straws. I hate paper straws. I would rather drink without a straw than drink through a paper straw. I don't want to drink through a tree. I don't like wooden straws because I don't want to taste the solid oak that it's made out of. That's why plastic straws are better. Now, that's not the only reason why plastic straws are better, but it's a big factor for me because I hate that people like to talk about, well, paper straws are better for the environment. No. People make them right now better for the environment, but actually, plastic straws have a better chance of, if they're done properly, can be better for the environment than paper straws, because paper straws are non-recyclable. Now, there are some of them that are biodegradable, and that's fair, because I get no one wants more pollution in the oceans. That's all fair. But if things are recycled properly, it will actually be less emissions and less plastic in the ocean if we use plastic straws and recycle them. And that's a big deal to me. Plus, I don't want my Coke to taste like wood. But the process of making paper straws is actually much worse for the environment. It's actually much worse for the green movement in general because you have to cut down trees. And cutting down trees is bad for the environment because they suck up CO2. And them sucking up CO2 allows them to grow better, which means they produce more oxygen, and we can all breathe better. So don't drink through a paper straw. That's what I'm trying to tell you. But the process of cutting down trees is pretty rigorous. And the machinery they have to use in order to cut down them are big pollutants because they're just big heavy machinery that are probably running on diesel fuel, which creates a ton of smog in comparison to gas. Even though I do like diesel vehicles, not my thing, just, but I do like them. I've never been able to like the smell. I've warmed up to it in recent years, but I'm just like, ugh. But gas tastes not taste. Yeah, guys, I'm drinking gas. Don't drink gas, guys. That's really bad for you. But I like the smell of gas, especially two-stroke fuel. We get a little bit of the oil in it, and you hear that, like my KTM. When you hear that smell that oil gas mixture, it's like and it just makes the heart beat. Uh, but the process of cutting down trees and then making them into paper straws, it actually uses more emissions than making plastic straws rather. So I think that people like the virtue signal because I think it was at the Plumsteadville Inn. They and I was like, why did they give me a paper straw? Like it's worse. It's worse. It's definitely worse. And my mom was mad at me because I started ranting about it. Uh, but she and my dad thought it was funny that I was ranting about it. Sorry, friend texted me. Uh, but yeah, my mom doesn't like the conflict, and she gets mad at me when I start ranting about things. I'm not even arguing with someone, but because we were out in public and we were sitting in a booth, and a woman looked over at us because I was talking spiritedly. I wasn't shouting, but I was just irritated. And it's like, and I took the paper straw out right away because I didn't want it. And my dad laughed, and I was like, "This is stupid." And my mom got embarrassed that someone was looking at us, which I don't get why my mom even cares. She's a stranger. She has no relationship to them, but that's a separate issue. But I don't know why I have to use a paper straw. If it's going to be a paper straw, I'd rather use I'd just rather just drink straight from the cup, no straw. That's just the end of it. So, I don't remember who posted it, but I saw someone like banning the electoral college because we don't believe in this republic that you believe in. We want pure democracy. I was like, oh, this can be something I talk about today. Everyone likes to talk about, and I'm not gonna lie, I was guilty of this when I was younger. When Mitt Romney lost the election in 2012 because he won the popular vote, and I got irritated. It's like, but I mean, I was 12, just for the record. I've grown in that past 8 years. But I thought it's like, well, why doesn't Mitt Romney win? He won the popular vote, and it's like the popular vote doesn't mean that you won, and it's because we have the electoral college. And now the electoral college, you can say, well, that's undemocratic. Yes, that's because it's not meant to be democratic. Because democracy, in all reality, is mob rule. That's why we have a constitutional, well, representative, if democratic republic. So what that means is we have a constitution that outlines our republic. So a republic is a representative form of government, and our republic has three branches of government. Good. So when we have these three separate branches, not all of them are elected. So we don't have judges that are elected, at least on the federal level. But then it doesn't matter the popular vote for the president. He has to win states. And this is important because the problem with having the majority rule things is because the biggest minority is the individual. So so when you're classifying groups of populations in certain areas, you want to work from the top. So the whole country is made up of states. Okay? And then you have states that are made up of counties. So these states that are made up of counties are separated into small parts. Then you have counties that are made up of individuals. And that's why, because you have to win a certain number of counties, and then you have to win a certain number of individuals. And all those things will add up to represent something. That's one of the reasons why, what is it? I believe it's the 17th or 18th Amendment, where we are no longer, where the way it was outlined in the Constitution to have senators was you elected your representatives to Congress, and the representatives in Congress would put forward senators to elect. Good. which means that we would, because Congress, the House of Representatives, is supposed to represent the people, and that is why it depends on the population of the state for how many congressmen you have. But when you go up to the Senate is supposed to represent the state itself. It's supposed to say on a national platform, this is what our state stands for in order to parse out ideas. But when you have the popular vote go for senators, that can be a problem because it's full of grandstanders now, and I have a problem with this. So when you have representatives and senators that both can be grandstanders, because you expect grandstanders in the lower house, but that negates the point of having states with a Senate because, well, not completely, but I hope you get the point. But you have this problem where the states are not really represented in the proper way anymore. But the Electoral College is indicative of of how the founders believed the country should be made of. Because the founders knew that pure democracy was mob rule. That's why they didn't believe in the majority infringing on the rights of the minority. And that's a big deal because the rights of the majority are always going to try to take away the rights of the majority. That's why you always hear Bernie Sanders appeal to the lower 99%, the billionaires and the millionaires, as they're the problem, right? That's because they're the minority. That's because they're the ones that were successful. I mean that was the kulaks in the Soviet Union. The people that were marginally successful, the peasants who happened to be successful in certain areas, who were slaves for a long time, and then all of a sudden, they got successful because they were doing something right. And this makes me so mad because when you have that majority that is mad at the top minority who has done well for themselves, that's the problem. And that's why pure democracy is a problem. Because if you think that, well, they have more than me, that's not fair. I'm going to take away their stuff because we're the majority. Well, that's not fair. They earned that. Now, you can say they're crony capitalism and all, and some of that's true. But when you take away those rights of the majority, or of the minority, rather, you're taking away rights overall. Because that means you no longer have rights. And rights, freedom, and liberty are what we stand for in America, and that's the biggest deal. Sorry. My phone's going a little bit crazy. But this whole pure democracy thing is just a bunch of crap. This is why we elect leaders. Leaders are important because they get the job done. Because we have leaders that we elect because they agree with most of what we say. That's the point of electing a leader. And then these leaders can work for us across the country. Because that's what they're doing. They're supposed to be working for us. They're supposed to be civil servants. That's why lifetime politicians are a big problem. And I'm actually not for term limits in Congress. Even though that doesn't sound right. I think they should be able to stay in Congress till they think that their work is done. I know a lot of people like term limits. Like my dad and I, that's our biggest disagreement, probably policy-wise. I don't believe in term limits. He does. It's fair. I understand his reasoning. I just don't think, because I believe in what the founders did, where they didn't believe in that. They believed in personal responsibility, that you should step down when you were done. I mean, that was what happened under the Articles of Confederation, that you were supposed to serve one term, which was 1 year, and after you did your work, then you would go back to your life, which is, I think, is fair. And I would like to see more of that. I don't really have much else to talk about today. Please leave comments, share and subscribe with your friends. But I think that's going to be the end for today. Thanks for watching. I know this has been about an hour of me just ranting about things. But have a good night, everybody. And pray for this country and the new president. We should pray for the new president because no matter what you say, he is our president now. He's the president of all the United States, and we need more people to pray for him because we want to see what we want our policies pushed through, and we should pray that he does those policies. So have a good night, everybody. We'll try to get another podcast up coming soon with an actual producer and actual cameras. But for now, see ya.